Hi, I'm Jeff Mikels, and I want to help you get back to the Jesus of the Bible. In our last episode, I made the claim that the kingdom of Jesus is an upside-down kingdom. And I'm not the first one to make that claim. It's been around for a little while. I think there's even a song related to that topic. But the kingdom of Jesus is a kingdom where the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And everything you think is important maybe isn't in the kingdom of Jesus. And today, I'm going to double down on that by taking you to Matthew 20. In our last episode, we were in Matthew 19. And in Matthew 19, Jesus said that the first will be last. But in Matthew 20, he says it again, along with a story that truly feels upside down. Let's go right into the story. It says this, Matthew 20, verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Twice in 2 chapters, Jesus has used that phrase at the end to make the point he's trying to make. Before we dig into that, I want to set the stage for the way we usually think when it comes to issues of God and grace and fairness and justice and things like that. I have a friend who's been using a particular phrase for the past few years when he talks about God. What he says is that God's justice requires him to reward good and punish evil. Specifically, he says that with God, no good deed goes eternally unrewarded, and no wrong thing goes eternally unpunished. If you do something good, that good deed needs to be rewarded, and because God is just, he will find a way to bring that reward to you. And if you do something bad, that bad deed needs to be punished. But then my friend will say, "But thanks be to God for providing Jesus as the one who takes that punishment in our place." You see, basically the idea is that for the bad I do, the punishment falls on Jesus, but for the good I do, the reward can fall on me. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm oversimplifying my friend. His belief is far more nuanced and in most ways theologically correct, I think. I just disagree with some of the ways he phrases things sometimes. You see, there's a problem with our theologies. A lot of our theological systems are based on our own logical limitations and our own presuppositions. And so we come at the lessons of God from the perspective of our own idea of fairness and justice and right and things like that. But this parable we just read is an example of one time when our theologies just don't line up with the words of Jesus. You see, we want to believe in a God who's fair, who's just, who punishes the bad and rewards the good. And even though we like the message of God's mercy to not punish our sins, we don't so much like the message of God's generosity to reward the people we don't think deserve it. Jesus tells this story to make us feel uncomfortable. This story is intended to make us feel like God is not fair. And in this story, Jesus is directly challenging our ideas of fairness because he wants us to know something better about God. God is generous. You see, that word is so unfamiliar to us in so many ways. We understand principles of fairness, we understand principles of justice, but generosity doesn't make a lot of sense. In the story, some workers spend all day in the fields and they get a denarius. And some workers spend just a single hour in the fields and they get a denarius. That's not fair. But I want you to think for a moment about how it's not fair, because that's the key to the story. Of course, one way of thinking about fairness is from the perspective of the first workers. As long as they don't know what the last workers get, they're fine. They receive exactly what was promised. You're promised a denarius, you do the work, you get a denarius. That's fairness. But if you pay attention to the details of the story, Jesus is telling the story with two specific details that I think are pretty important. In fact, they're details that Jesus is adding to the story to raise the sense of emotional tension we have in it. First, the landowner made a deal with the first workers, but never actually made a specific deal with any of the other workers. He never actually promised the other workers a specific amount. The second set of workers, he just says, I'll pay you whatever is fair, whatever is right is the word he uses, but then the rest of them, we don't even get any agreed upon amount. Jesus is doing that specifically so that we know the landowner hasn't made a specific deal with the others. He's saving the surprise to the end of the story. And at the end of the story, here's the second detail. The landowner intentionally pays the last workers first so that the first workers get to see how much he's paying all the other people. You see, the way Jesus organizes the story and the way he tells this story and the details he adds to the story are intentionally designed to highlight how unfair the situation feels. It doesn't matter what the deal was in the morning with the first workers. Once they see what the last workers get, they will be immediately feeling the pang of unfairness. It doesn't matter what they agreed to. They will feel scammed or slighted, disrespected, robbed even. It's just not fair, they complain. But Jesus actually addresses that head on. In the story, the landowner says, "Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Didn't I keep my arrangement with you? I'm not being unfair to you. I have kept my arrangement with you." According to the story, the landowner is not being unfair. He's not being unfair to any of the individual groups. He's only being unfair if you compare the groups to each other. And it's only unfair if you compare them to each other using our human methods of calculating fairness. But honestly, if he's being unfair to anyone, it's not the people for whom he made a promise and then kept his promise, the people who started the day. If he's being unfair to anyone, it's being unfair in a kind of positive way towards the later workers. And we don't use the language of unfairness in a positive way. We have a different word for that. And when we treat someone better than they deserve, we call it being generous, or we call it showing them grace. You see, Jesus wants you to know that fairness is not a kingdom virtue. To be sure, fairness is a virtue of this world. Our world thinks it's good to be fair, and there's some places where we need to work for equity, and we need to work for justice, and we need to work for fairness, and all those sorts of things. There is a virtue to fairness, but in the kingdom, the virtue is higher than fairness, and the virtue of the kingdom is grace. That is why the last get treated like the first. The last will be first. And I have to be honest with you at this point, my heart is heavy. Because you see, for most of my life, despite being a person raised in the language of grace, I'm honestly far too often a person committed to words of fairness. I appreciate grace, but I often speak fairness. Even though my church tradition strenuously contends for a gospel, a good news that is based on the grace of God, the same church tradition will levy the language of fairness whenever it happens to benefit them. When the topic of poverty comes up, I will hear the language of fairness and claims that people who don't work are lazy and should not be supported by the rest of us taxpayers. When the topic of abortion comes up, or the topic of giving free maternity help or free child care, I will hear the language of fairness and claims that women who make bad decisions need to face the consequences of their actions. When the topic of affirmative action comes up, I will hear the language of fairness and meritocracy, along with claims that, in this country, anyone can get a good education and find a good job if they're just willing to work hard enough for it. And when the topic of police brutality against minorities comes up, I will hear again the language of fairness and how people who are innocent have no reason to resist. And when the topic of immigration comes up, I will hear the language of fairness, along with claims that people who enter the country without prior documentation are criminals who are stealing the country away from the rest of us. I don't even have to go into the logical arguments of why it's a strange thing that we might experience all the glories and wonders and benefits of living in this country simply by being born here as an accident of history or a blessing of God, but people who were born 12 miles away don't deserve the same kind of dignity and treatment that the rest of us do. I'm not even going to get into the illogic of the way we treat foreigners. I'm just going to speak to you about kingdom principles. And for some reason, we, people who claim to be part of the kingdom of Jesus, we, the people of grace, when the celebrity pastor we love has an affair, we will show grace. But we all of a sudden flip to being people of fairness when we need an excuse to oppose someone we don't like, or when we're afraid that someone is going to get a better deal than we are. If someone else is going to be elevated above us, or if someone else is going to get to our position in some way that we perceive as easier than the path we have walked, all of a sudden we become people of fairness. If someone else is the last worker and we are the first worker, we all of a sudden become people of fairness. Even though all along the kingdom virtue is grace. Do you know what Jesus has to say about us? He will say the last will be first. The people who were there at the beginning of the day, they don't get anything more than the people who come in right now. Listen, I'm not just making stuff up here. I'm not just trying to pull at strings of Bible passages because I have some kind of hatred for conservative politics or because I want you to vote for Democrats. Honestly, I still see myself as a conservative in principle, but that doesn't even matter. Honestly, I kind of don't care who you vote for, but I really care about whether you have the right king and whether you are committed to citizenship in the right kingdom. And in case you need a little bit more encouragement to see the kingdom of Jesus in the right way, well, the rest of Matthew 20 gives you two more stories to drive the lesson deeper. Verse 17 says this: Now Jesus was going up to Jerusalem. On the way, he took the 12 aside and said to them, We are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the third day, he will be raised to life. Now, I love that passage because it is Jesus predicting his death and resurrection. And if anyone can predict their death and resurrection and actually pull it off, I'm going to follow that guy with whatever he happens to say. I love what Jesus says there. It's the basis of my understanding of grace. But honestly, because I need it, I love the rest of the story too. Because immediately after that line, on the third day he will be raised to life, we read verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons, that means the mom of James and John, came to Jesus with her sons and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. What is it you want? He asked. She said, Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I am going to drink? We can, they answered. Pause here for just a moment. When Jesus says you don't know what you're asking, he is not telling them that they're being stupid for asking the question. He's telling them that if they want to have the level of honor that he has, they're going to need to walk the path that he walks. And he will tell it to them explicitly in just a few lines. But right here, Jesus just simply says, Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? And they answer, of course we can, because they're arrogant. And that's part of our problem too. But verse 23, Jesus said to them, You will indeed drink from my cup. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. Now he then bypasses this story. He says that his heavenly Father has already established who's going to be sitting in the highest places of honor. But he will now tell us about how it is determined. Who gets to be the greatest in this kingdom? We're about to find out. Verse 24. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them together and said, You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. There he says it. He says the places of highest honor belong to the people who go through the places of lowest service. And so the Son of Man has come to be a ransom for the whole rest of the world. And that's why the Son of Man will sit on the place he will sit on. And the others who are next to him must be those who walk a similar path. But did you see the similarities between this story and the parable earlier in the chapter? Both stories culminate with one group of people getting upset at another group of people. But the story has some things the parable didn't. You see, the parable had a landowner show generosity through the giving of money, but Jesus is showing way more generosity through the giving of his own life. The parable shows people who experience the generosity of the landowner, but this lesson gives people the command to replicate the generosity of Jesus. If you're working in a field, you need to take what the landowner gives you. But if you're living in the kingdom, you need to do what the king does. We are so arrogant and selfish. If we're honest, we only want what will lift us up. If we need grace to lift us up, we will take it. If it's fairness that will lift us up, we will take that. But if either grace or forgiveness threatens to lift someone else higher than us, we will oppose it. And in light of that, I want you to be absolutely clear when it comes to the operations of the kingdom and the demands of the king. The leaders of the world leverage power to stay above others, but your king says not so with you. When it comes to you, when it comes to anyone who would consider themselves a citizen of this kingdom and a servant of this king, when it comes to you, you are supposed to leverage your power to elevate someone else, because the king gave his life to lift you up. Your king came to serve. Let me show you how this chapter ends. It seems a little anticlimactic, but there's a line in it that I find incredibly beautiful. Verse 29, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called to them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they said, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. Now, did you see what Jesus said to them? No, I'm not talking about the end of the story when he heals them. In fact, at the end of the story when he heals them, Matthew doesn't record anything Jesus says. The only thing Jesus says in the story is the thing in the middle. I'm talking about that when the 2 men were being obnoxious, when they're being annoying and everyone else was trying to get them to close their mouths. Jesus said something to them. And did you see it? He says, "What do you want me to do for you?" What do you want me to do for you? That's not the language of a king. That's the language of a servant. But that's the language of this king, and that's the language of this kingdom. In the kingdom of Jesus, we do not ask the question, "God, what are you going to do for me?" In the kingdom of Jesus, we don't ask the question of another person, "What are you going to do for me?" In the kingdom of Jesus, the question is, "What do you want me to do for you?" You want me to give you my shirt? Have my coat too. You want me to go 1 mile? I'll go 2 miles. You want to take advantage of me? Well, go right ahead. Because in the kingdom of Jesus, the last will be first, and the first will be last. And whoever wants to be great among you will be the servant of all, because the Son of Man came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The language of the King of Kings, the language of the King of the kingdom you and I want to enter, the kingdom of heaven and eternity, the kingdom of God the Father Almighty, has an entry point that says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Oh, I hope this has been encouraging to you, but I also hope it's been a challenge to you. I know it is for me. Every single time I think of the generosity of Jesus, I feel simultaneously this weird sense of it's unfair. Other people deserve to walk the hard road that I feel like I have walked, and I want other people to pay the same dues that I feel I have had to pay. But the truth is, I'm so grateful for a kingdom of grace. And my king has demanded that I be a person of grace to others as well. It's challenging to me, but I also hope it's encouraging to you. If it is, would you share this with someone else that you know could use this encouragement or perhaps this challenge? And also, would you do the thing, leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or whatever other app you're using to watch this or listen to this? If you leave a comment, you do a review, you do the subscribe or like or whatever it is the platform has, those platforms will do a large part of the sharing for us. And eventually, maybe something like this can reach a person who really is on the edge of joining the true kingdom of Jesus. And that's what I hope for them, and that's what I hope for you. It's what I hope for me. Perhaps through this, we can be the people who encourage other people to put Jesus first and do the same ourselves.